Welcome to TGS, Transform, Grow, Succeed. This podcast is about your work as a caring professional and a caring leader and the ideas that we can share to elevate and expand what we do to ensure that those that we serve get the very best of what we have to offer. My name is Dr. Tim Gravoy, Executive Director of TGS Educational Consulting. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Scott Menzel, Superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District, to the show. Scott joined the Scottsdale Unified School District family as superintendent on July 1st, 2020. And Dr. Scott became superintendent of Washtenaw Intermediate School District in 2001. So you've been a school leader for quite some time. And even before then, you spent 4 years as superintendent of the Livingston Education Service Agency and 5 years as a superintendent of Whitmore Lake Public Schools. Dr. Scott is driven by the moral imperative to provide equitable, inclusive, and just opportunities for all students and helps the Scottsdale Unified community achieve this work by collaborating with local, state, and national partners. And when not at work, you might find Dr. Scott hiking a trail on the McDowell-Sonoran Preserves. Scott, did I get that right?
Essentially, it's right. I started at Washtenaw ISD in 2011, but this is my 22nd year overall as a superintendent.
22nd year overall as a superintendent. So it's that school leadership is definitely the big part of your career then. And so you're an absolutely outstanding person to be speaking with today. So, and thank you for that. Thank you for having the chance to add your leadership experience to the record there. It's important. So fantastic. So I invited you, Scott, on the show today to really talk about what makes leadership possible when circumstances make leading seem impossible to do. And so without getting kind of too much into it, not too long ago, Scottsdale Unified experienced a really tough leadership situation that was really just kind of a reflection of that tough leadership environment that we're all experiencing nationally, and one that honestly leaders are contending with still. I'm wondering, what could you tell us about what happened and what seemed to help?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation, Dr. Tim. And when I think about it, I think it's important to set the context. So I started in Scottsdale right as COVID was changing the game for everyone. And so we had to navigate a global pandemic, both in this community and communities across the country. And during the COVID pandemic, a number of other situations started surfacing. When you think about the culture wars, people talking about critical race theory, people talking about social emotional learning, and identifying what they believe were things that they would argue are happening in schools, and an agenda nationally ended up getting superimposed on local communities. And that happened in Scottsdale as well during the pandemic and immediately following the pandemic. But last January, we had an election. 2 new school board members were elected. We had, at the end of January, a Fox News story that was launched nationally that talked about my leadership and alleged that I was racist against white people. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about that, that resulted in a lot of conversation, and there were multiple stories that circulated in local and national media. We had 2 representatives and a state senator call for my resignation or the board to terminate me. Superintendent of Public Instruction called for my termination. So yeah, it was a little bit stressful in this environment. And all of those things came out of an interview that I had done with an employee at the Washtenaw Intermediate School District talking about the WISD commitment to equity, inclusion, and social justice. And selective quotes were taken from that interview with the employee and weaponized in order to create a very different narrative from the one that we're committed to and I'm committed to here in Scottsdale, and that is ensuring that we meet the needs of each and every learner, regardless of their circumstance of birth, regardless of their identity. We're here to provide them the support necessary to be successful. So that question created a lot of noise, a lot of action, and culminated in a very large governing board meeting in February of 23, where hundreds of people showed up. Some people hoping that I would get fired and other people hoping that I would continue. The vast majority were supportive of the work that we were doing in Scottsdale. And ultimately, I'm still the superintendent today.
Yeah, just noting that we are having a conversation with the sitting superintendent of Scottsdale Unified as it comes through that. And honestly, it really is that you are currently the superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District. So you said, well, it was a little bit stressful. I'm hearing that, and the muscles in the back of my neck are tensing up on your behalf of just hearing how tremendously stressful many human beings would find this. It would be understandable if somebody was saying, no, actually, it was probably huge in terms of the distraction. What were some of the things that, like, the day before that story broke, you were really excited to talk about and highlight? Like, just some highlights about some great work that was happening at Scottsdale Unified,
So
perhaps, that you couldn't really talk about because now we got to talk about this.
as a district, we've been focused on providing and engaging all of our students in future-focused world-class learning. We're a very good school district. I believe we truly have the ability to be world-class, and we've got a strategic plan that really elevates academic achievement, creating a culture and climate that ensures that every student feels a sense of belonging. Like other districts, we're working on strategies to attract and retain top talent, because that's critical to where we want to go as an organization. And so we have teams of people who've been working to operationalize their strategic plan and drive an agenda for kids. And this then distracted from that conversation, certainly. But it didn't result in us taking our eyes off the ball. It was something that was superimposed as an outside agenda. And so we used it as an opportunity to talk about what our values and our core commitments as a district are. So I think whenever you're confronted with a challenge, whether it's a crisis that happens in the district as a result of something that happened in a school or something that's superimposed by outside forces, it's an opportunity for leaders to step into the moment to reaffirm what the organizational values are, what the why is behind the work that we do. As a school district, we have a theme, because kids, for this year. Everything we do is driven by our students and their success. And so anything that is outside of that is a distraction. And part of my role as a leader is to help create a buffer between the teachers in the classroom working with our kids and the adult drama on the periphery. And I want to move that noise to the periphery so that we can focus on what really matters to help our students achieve their full potential.
Almost as it sounds like almost like an organizational mindfulness practice, almost of we're going to stay very focused on the things that we do, because kids and you and in that role as creating kind of that insulation as thick as you can get it to make sure that what needs to happen inside classrooms happens that way. As you think about it, like, could you think of any strategies or any like specific things that like helps just you personally and perhaps how that translated, organizationally?
So I think there are a couple of other things that, upon reflection, are important from a leadership perspective. This could have turned out very differently, and in fact, in other parts of the country, did turn out very differently. There are superintendents who have lost their jobs for taking principled stands in support of all of our learners. In this case, when I arrived in Scottsdale, and the pandemic officially, people started closing schools in March. I came in July, and we had to come together as a community to identify how we were going to address the learning needs of our students. So I believe that leaders need to build relationships with people at all levels of the system, both within the school system itself and within the larger community. And what we saw happen in February of 23, when people mobilized and came out in support of my leadership, was a product of having built relationships of trust long before that moment of crisis ever emerged. And so I think one of the takeaways for any leader is don't short circuit building authentic relationships with people in the community. No leader can do this alone. We are only as good as the team itself. So recognizing that the partnership with parents, with teachers, with our classified staff, every person in the system plays an important role as a part of this educational journey. I think that's critical. And that's what we saw reflected when people came out and spoke in support of maintaining the current leadership that we had. And it might have been very different if I hadn't connected with people and built those relationships.
And so it's hard to, it is perhaps it's easier to stand up and support and wrap around a leader when that's somebody that you know well already.
I think that's true. I also think it's important for leaders to truly know what their non-negotiables are. I've said to many colleagues over the years, you need to know what you're prepared to get fired for. I'm unapologetically supportive of every single student that we serve. And I don't believe that we should allow some terms to be hijacked by people who want to weaponize terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we have to be clear on what the definitions are, because people have moved in ways that are not true to what I mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion, or what we mean as a school system. So I think that's important. But at the end of the day, you have to know that if it's a choice between compromising your principles or standing up for what's right for kids, it may result in not being able to keep your current position. Fortunately, in Scottsdale, the people who valued the work that we're doing were the majority of people. And so we're continuing to do the work on behalf of kids here.
In a lot of work that I do with educators, especially around like the just issues of compassion fatigue, and we talk a lot about just moral injury and just what the consequences are to us, just physically and emotionally and mentally, when we continue to allow ourselves to work in an environment that requires us to do things that we're not okay with, and that go against our values. It's actually one of the reasons why I kind of warn superintendents not to necessarily talk to me about self-care work unless we're okay with staff setting healthy boundaries in the future, because that's a big part of it. But it sounds kind of like that to a certain degree. I talk in the self-care world, I'll say we can't self-care our way out of moral injury. We can't do that. There's no breathing exercise that's going to be okay with doing wrong or feeling like you have to. And what it sounds like, kind of you were in a situation where one way or the other you were going to, because kids.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of framing it. Ultimately, the decisions aren't easy, and I believe that you can never go wrong when you stand true to your principles and you're doing the work because of kids. There are many other agendas that are operating. Some people operate because of a desire for power. Some want control. Others want access or perceived prestige. But at the end of the day, when you think about the responsibility we have in public education to unleash the potential in all of our learners, regardless of their zip code or their circumstance of birth, and to provide opportunities and pathways for them to really achieve that potential, that is transformative for communities. And when other people have an agenda that would undermine or discredit public education, not because they're working from a basis of this is what kids need, but because they're working from a different center of and locus of control, I think that we need leaders who are willing to stand up and push back against that. Otherwise, the system itself will crumble. And I think that's really important. And it's also not easy. So I understand when people are reluctant to engage, because it can be very challenging, very stressful, and there can be a personal toll that is a result of making those kinds of decisions.
So, that's a really great time for us to take a break. And when we come back from a break, what I'd love to do is talk a bit more about that, because it sounds like there was two parallel paths that needed to be engaged to keep that focus on because kids. And one was that insulation, that buffer against between outside and inside and getting the work done. But then the other was, no, we need to engage to be very clear about our story, just outside as well. And I'd love to explore that a bit more when we come back.
Sure.
Hey, everybody! I think we're going to have some fun, talk about some hard stuff, laugh a little bit, and hopefully learn something from each other. How many of you know that I'm super introverted? It's handy when I'm traveling because, I'll be sitting next to someone and they'll say, so what do you do? And if I'm not in the mood to chat, I'll be like, I study shame, what do you do? They're just like, nah. How many of you want more love, intimacy, joy? True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. You don't measure vulnerability by the amount of disclosure. Live tweeting your bikini wax, not vulnerability. I'm not gonna bullshit you. Vulnerability is hard, and it's scary, and it feels dangerous. But it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives and having to ask ourselves, what if I would have shown up?
All right. And so what I just heard that I would love to explore just a bit is that, and it kind of connects with the superintendent I spoke with in Iowa, who we just had like 5 or 6 people show up in his office once demanding to tour schools to make sure there was no cat litter anywhere. And it just was his absolute determination that the moment he saw a negative post on Facebook, he was finding the phone number of the person who did it and inviting them to lunch. Now, it's a small town in Iowa, a bit different than Scottsdale, but absolute relentless. I think you two would have a lot in common, honestly. Very relentless about the narrative of what was going on in Lewiston. central schools in Iowa. And so like for him, he was like, you can't, there's this advice sometimes like ignore the trolls, don't talk to them. And that makes sense. But it sounds like it might not always make sense if we're actually going to have this conversation about protecting public education. And I'm curious how kind of what your take on that might be, if that's all right.
No, I think it's a really important point when you think about the importance of dialogue and understanding where people are coming from. So I have an open door policy, and I'm willing to meet with any person once. Now, some individuals with agendas I might not meet with for subsequent occasions if they're not willing to link arms to support, moving forward on behalf of our students in Scottsdale. But I'm willing to meet with anyone because I think I need to understand where they're coming from. I need to understand what their hopes and fears are, what information they have or misinformation. Oftentimes people have a part of the story, but not the whole story.
Yep.
And unless you're willing to engage in that dialogue, you really can't find a way towards common ground. And in the book, The Call to Courage, one of the conversations is about moving from debate to dialogue. Where can we find common ground across the partisan and political divide? Right now, it's hyper-partisan, but most people, and I would say the vast majority, 80% plus, are really not an extreme left or extreme right. Most people are somewhere center left or center right. They just want good things for kids. They want good things for their family. They want good things for the community. So if we can dial back the temperature, engage in reflective dialogue and practices that allow people to tell their story and create an environment where they feel heard, valued, and respected, regardless of where they're coming from, in order to create some shared understanding of how we can get to a preferred future for the entire community, I think that's pretty powerful.
And so some folks might suggest, in fact, I even remember as part of my leadership program, leadership training, other superintendents, even suggesting like, don't engage with people who are constantly negative. And so it sounds like you're not exactly saying, no, Tim, you definitely should engage with folks who are really not for kids in the same way that you are forever and ever and ever. But what you're saying is meet once, create an opportunity. Perhaps there is a reason to meet twice, and perhaps give folks a reason to surprise you from time to time.
I think it's important. We should be in the practice of calling people into the conversation instead of calling them out. Now, there are things that are extreme that we do need to call out. There's behavior that targets certain groups of kids that's inappropriate. I won't stand for. I don't tolerate people targeting any particular group of students or staff based on their identities. I think we're trying to create an environment here where every person feels valued and a sense of belonging. And so there are times where you have to call out bad behavior, but we want to respect the people and call out the problem. We want to change, and that's also in the book Call to Courage, really thinking about how do we value people and then tackle the challenges when there's misinformation or things that are harmful to certain groups of people within our community. And so, yeah, I think it's a mistake not to engage in that dialogue. And then if people choose to not be good faith actors in that conversation, then it's okay to say no. But I think on the front end, it's important to engage.
Having some healthy boundaries makes perfect sense at a certain point, but it also makes a really good sense, just especially just kind of going back to the importance of building relationships. It's really hard to build a relationship with someone you won't talk to. And
right.
So that sounds like just a fundamental strategy that sounds kind of important. I think my grandmother used to tell me, "Be nice twice." Was always her rule. Be nice twice,
cool.
And it's that. And then after twice, you can be busy at the next time she comes around or he comes around or they come around or something. And that sounds like a pretty healthy boundary to me, and also kind of protects that opportunity for dialogue. Well, let's take a break then, and when we come back, we'll have a final thought from Scott, who's the superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District, on how we can maintain focus, and his district's focus is because kids, even when giant distractions get superimposed from outside. My name is Dr. Tim Devoy, and I'm excited to launch our new free self-paced online course that you can take anytime that feels good to you and watch as much of it as feels good to you as well. And it's called PBIS 101, More Than the Basics of Positive Behavior Intervention Support. And it's going to go over the basics of PBIS for sure, but you're going to get even more than that, because we're going to talk about the key features of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, what the difference is between all of those different tiers, what are some best practices in terms of getting started, and what are some things that you can avoid to be the most successful in helping your students become successful learners and successful human beings. Click on the link. It's absolutely free. I can't wait to hear how well this course serves you. Well, welcome back, Scott. It's been absolutely great to talk with you today. And just given all the ground that we've covered, I'm wondering what final thought you might have for us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. From a final thought perspective, I believe it's really important for individuals to be true to their core principles and not allow others from the outside to superimpose a narrative on you. It's not about being defensive, but it's about being authentic and true, always in service of those core principles that ground you as a leader.
Well, Dr. Scott Menzel, thank you so much for being here today. And again, just thank you for sharing your experience with our listeners. Authentic is not defensive. It's not the same thing. I just love that. And I think I'll be thinking about that for years to come. And listeners, I really hope you enjoyed our show. And I hope you reach out to me or to Scott with your thoughts on our conversation. You can find Scott on his LinkedIn profile, and I'll put the link in the show notes. And you can find me at www.tgseducationalconsulting.com. And if you're a school leader, let me know what you think by dropping a comment below. And until next time, everyone, may you have as many opportunities to be as generous and kind to yourself as you are with those that you serve.